Hello to everybody, and thanks for joining us at this Feast of Tabernacles when we are incorporating this feast with the Run4Israel, which we've done every year for a long time now, on the mountain behind me, a mountain called Mulvanai in North Wales. And we're not doing the actual run this year because of the COVID restrictions, and a lot of people want to stay at home and keep themselves safe and isolate from what we see as a rise in Wales today of the virus. So we've decided we're going to record it and make a film, and Becky has been helping to do that, and we've got some really wonderful guests that we couldn't have physically here, although they have been physically here with us at various times over the last few years. And they will give you their story about Israel and some of the things that are important to them about the nation of Israel. But Israel is important to me, particularly because I was there in 1967, just after the Six-Day War, and it was an experience that absolutely impacted me. Now, you might wonder why I'm displaying all these flowers next to me here, but it's because I love to grow things, vegetables and flowers, and I've grown these flowers. I've grown them for Shirley, my wife, really, but I do love to grow flowers. Now, Israel grows millions of flowers. In fact, they export 100 million stems of flowers every year. That's 10 million bunches of flowers altogether, and 65% of those go to the Netherlands, and the Netherlands ship them out again to countries like ours. So Israel produces these flowers in the land itself, on the land that over 100 years ago was actually incapable of producing beautiful flowers. Now this year I've produced and grown a flower called a ranunculus, which is actually grown in Israel. The little corns are grown there, and they're used in bridal displays and for bridal bouquets. They're absolutely beautiful, and Israel exports those flowers. They're just like silk. They're absolutely beautiful. But actually, I want to talk about what else Israel exports, and I want to begin with the Bible, because Israel exported the Bible through the many missionaries that have gone out, not only since Christianity, but before Christianity. Remember, there were synagogues in all parts of Asia Minor when Paul ministered, and they've exported the word of God to us, and without that, we wouldn't know the Messiah of Israel, the King of Israel, who we believe is Yeshua. So Israel have exported something to the West particularly, well, right across the world, which is of great importance to us. And the Bible actually speaks of a moral code. It speaks of justice and equality, and it speaks of giving to the poor. And Israel today are exporting the idea of democracy, justice and equality to the nations that surround it. Now, many of those nations have tyrannical governments which are fueled by terrorism against Israel, and they are not democratic in any way, shape or form. And many of these countries have no equal rights for women. They have no equal rights for children. They don't have equal rights for those who want democracy. So there's many in these countries who can't vote for the government that is leading them. Many of them have terrorist governments like Hamas in Gaza. Now, Israel actually exported to Gaza all the infrastructure like water, electricity, sewerage between 1967 and 2000, when Israel governed Gaza. Before that, Egypt didn't care about the people in Gaza, and since 2000, when Israel had issues with Arafat in Gaza, and since 2005, when Israel pulled out of Gaza, then the people of Gaza have lost the ability to vote for their own government. Hamas are ruling there as an undemocratic government. Hamas don't give money to the poor. They use the money to buy arms to attack Israel. So Israel, who have Arabs in the Knesset, actually have a democratic government which should be ruling in Gaza for the benefit of the ordinary people. Now today on this film we have a wonderful man called Matan Dansker, who is a political analyst, as a Jew living in Israel. He speaks about the need for democracy. He's a really good friend of ours, and Israel are exporting the idea of democracy to the Arab world. So we're really blessed that you're here with us, Matan. The other thing Israel exports is medical aid, not only to the West in the form of medication, advanced medication for things like cancer and diabetes and all these major issues that we have, but they also export medical aid to the Palestinian Arabs living in Gaza and living in what is known as the West Bank, but should be called Judea and Samaria. And we have a wonderful man with us who is a medical doctor in Israel, a great friend of Father's House again, Naftali Gross, who's going to talk to us today. And Naftali will at any time talk to us about the medical advancements that Israel have, which they give and share with the Palestinian Arabs. They don't hold back from that, and that's part of the equality that Israel promotes in the Middle East, showing that there's no difference between Arab and Jew when it comes to medical aid and help and support. And that is a biblical precept as well. And we also have a wonderful friend of Father's House, and actually a wonderful friend of Great Britain, and that's Steven Jaffe, who is a representative of Magen, Adom, the ambulance service in Israel, and Stephen is going to speak today. Now, Stephen will tell you that if an ambulance is called to an Arab village, it goes. And no matter whether it's Jew, Arab, Christian, Muslim, the ambulance service, Magen Adom, respond, because the Bible tells us, and this is again going back to biblical script, the Bible tells us to care and love the alien, love your neighbor as yourself. Magen Adom do exactly that. We also have, and it's amazing that we have with us today, Tom Warren, who's a member of Father's House. He's grown up in Father's House. We absolutely love Tom. Tom is actually a lance corporal in the army, and he's done a run over the mountains in the Falklands. Now, Tom is a member of the British Armed Forces, and Tom really is an expression of how the armed forces are defending a piece of land which Britain actually owns, and that's the Falklands. And Tom would say, I guess, that he is part of a defence force. Now, what's interesting about this is that the Israeli army is called the Israeli Defense Force. They're not, and have never been, a force, a military force that is on the offensive. It never starts a war. It always defends the people of Israel against attacks from Arab terrorists who want to destroy Israel. So for me, I find it very, very difficult when I hear of churches and organizations who are standing against Israel, because what Israel exports are things that are very important to the West. But what Israel's opponents export is nothing more than terrorism. And that's where we need to get a balance in the church. We need to understand if we want to support democracy and biblical precepts and principles, then we must support the nation of Israel. Because to support the creation of another nation like Palestine, if Palestine doesn't exist as a nation, but if we promote the idea that a Palestine state is something that should be created, and there are many churches and many church organizations that promote that, then what we are doing, we are promoting a state which is based on the exportation of terrorism, not only to Israel because they want to destroy the whole nation of Israel, but terrorism which can affect the whole of civilized society. So the church has to wake up to that, to wake up to what Israel has exported in the past, which is biblical principles based on loving your neighbor. They export today the idea that we should still love our neighbor through things like politics, democracy, that Matan is going to speak about, medical aid, like Naftali is involved in, equality, which is what Magen and Adom are doing, and what Steven Jaffe is going to share with us, and also the idea that Israel is only simply defending its nation, which it has done since 1948 through the wars of the War of Independence, the Six-Day War in 1967, the Yom Kippur War in 1973, and the wars and the attacks that they've faced since 2005, since a community called Gush Katif came out of Gaza, a Jewish community came out of Gaza and left the Palestinian Arabs in Gaza to their own will. What's happened since then is Hamas have simply fired thousands of rockets, and it's been a continuous war that waged against Israel, that the Israel Defense Forces have had to deal with. So I want to thank, in anticipation of what Matan and Naftali and Steven Jaffe and Tom have done, I want to thank those four people who are very, very special to us, and we really appreciate you being part of this film today. So I'm going to leave this now with Becky to take us on with the film, the piece of film and the footage that Matan and Naftali and Steven and Tom have left us with. So I hope you enjoy the rest of the film, and I'll say goodbye later on when this part of the film is finished. So thank you very much indeed. Bye.
Shalom and Chag Sameach, which means a joyful festival. In the Torah, Sukkot, the Festival of Tabernacles, is described repeatedly as Zaman Simchatenu, the season of our joy. And I think the Festival of Sukkot has a particularly strong message for our world today. As you will know, in the festival, we leave the comfort of our homes and we dwell in a hut in the garden. And that takes us out of a world of comfort, a world where we think we're in control of things, into a frail and temporary hut, where it becomes clear that we rely on the protection of the Almighty. So that is one of the key meanings of the Festival of Sukkot, and what a message for our world today when everything seems out of our control. You know, the governments, the scientists, the doctors are struggling with the pandemic. Ultimately, we realize more and more how much we depend on the Almighty's protection at this time. So it's a very significant festival, and I am truly honored to be asked to wish all my friends at Father's House Chag Sameach, a joyful festival for tabernacles. For me, Father's House represents a light, a beacon of light in an increasingly dark and dangerous world. You have stood with the Jewish people, the local Jewish community to you, in particularly in the northwest of England and North Wales, but also globally, as we have seen Israel come under ferocious attack, not just from Hamas missiles, but this year we saw an outpouring of hatred towards Israel in our own country. And what I admire about Father's House and my long-standing friend, Pastor Mike Fryer, is your confidence and your determination to stand up against that tide of hatred. And that is, beyond what words can say, an encouragement to the Jewish community, which often feels so much that it is alone facing this increase in Jew hatred around the world. So you're doing your bit and more than your bit, more than we could ever ask. And it's a huge honor for me to be asked to give a message of mutual support and mutual encouragement from the Jewish community to yourselves and Father's House, and to say thank you for all that you do. Now, very recently, this book was produced. It's a tribute to Chief Rabbi Sachs, who very sadly passed away not so long ago, but very sorely missed. And tucked away in the book, there was an anecdote, a little story that I want to share with you, because it relates to your part of the world. In 2001, a religious Jewish youth movement held its national weekend in North Wales with over 1,000 participants. And at the Shabbat dinner in a massive hall, Chief Rabbi Sachs was leading the singing. He was standing on his chair. All the youngsters from the youth movement were on their chairs. They were singing, making a lot of noise for Shabbat. Now, any large event in which the chief rabbi attends with other VIPs, it required a large police presence. And many of the policemen covering for security for the event were from the local North Wales force. And they heard this massive surge of noise coming out from the hall. They rushed in to see what was going on. They were quite concerned, and they saw this amazing spectacle of hundreds upon hundreds of Jewish young people full of enthusiasm for Shabbat, being led by the chief rabbi in singing. And one of the policemen said they'd never seen such a large crowd enjoying themselves so much without any alcohol, which I thought was a very funny but telling description of what was going on. So, and about 5 years later, they held a second national weekend, also in North Wales. And I'm pretty sure it's very close to you at Mold. And one of the policemen who was covering security at that second event came up to Chief Rabbi Sachs and said to him, you know, I've actually retired from the police force, but when I was told that you guys were coming back again to North Wales, I contacted my former colleagues and said, I really want to come back again to see you and to witness again that tremendous enthusiasm for the Sabbath. So they gave him a uniform, and there he was back again at the camp. So that's a remarkable, positive story linking your part of the world, your community, with the Jewish community. And we want to see more of that enthusiasm, energy, and positivity in the year ahead. And I know that you at Father's House, for all that you do, both in countering the negativity, whether it's at local arts centres, where it's the positivity of running up mountains to raise funds for good causes in Israel, it is outstanding. And I know that I speak for all the Jewish people who've encountered Father's House to say, thank you, Toda Rabbah, have a fantastic festival. And I really hope it isn't long before that I can visit you in person and renew that friendship with Pastor Mike and all of you in the congregation. So shalom to you all. God bless.
Hello friends and all the congregants in Father's house. I'm here with my older brother, uncle, almost great-grandfather, Dr. Naftali Gross.
Shalom from Israel, shalom from the Judean hills.
Exactly, rightly so, and we're really excited to be speaking with you. I know we've gotten old through the years, and I've been following you on social media. You're all staying young, which is kind of frustrating. I guess we don't have the right genes. We're speaking to you here after we took a nice jog here in actually what is kind of a tense area that Naftali will speak about. Areas just outside of Jerusalem, mountains that have been deliberately burned, unfortunately, in an attempt to burn elements and parts of the land of Israel as a part of the national struggle that we have here in this area. We know that the holidays are coming forth, and we have shared values, shared holidays that bring us together and bind us together in these very special days. But always in the more religious elements, I leave them to my friend Naftali. I'll be more on the depressing and complicated side of things. In 2 minutes, I'd just like to explain to you, hoping that all of you and your families are doing well during this complicated years that we've been going through of COVID-19. Just to tell you a little bit of the national stand that Israel has now in the world and in Israel. As you probably heard, the Iranian regime, which has proxies all over Israel, attempting to clog Israel from all corners of the land. Northern part of Israel, it's Hezbollah. In the southern part of Israel, not a Shia regime, but also a regime called Hamas that is continuing to fire rockets into Israel. And of course, the Iranians themselves that are closest to the bomb than they've ever been. We stand here resilient and strong. The people of Israel are flourishing. Even in these complicated times, our economy, our startups are becoming stronger than ever before. But these are still hard times. You all saw just a few weeks ago, or rather a month ago, the decision of Ben & Jerry's, for instance, the company in America, to boycott the land of Judea. What an anti-Semitic and anti-Israel decision to boycott a people, to boycott a territory that all parts of Israeli society, even those who have some disagreements in our pluralistic society, think that are an essential part of our heritage and of the land of Israel. This struggle that began on social media, this attempt to darken the soul of the Jewish state, is one that you have a lot to do for. I know that you coming together every Shabbat and every holiday, fighting in social media sometimes feels like there's despair, like you don't have impact. But it's the exact opposite. We have to continue spreading the light of truth. We have to continue coming together year after year to fight for the one and only Jewish state that brings together the values, the Judeo-Christian values, and the values that we all hold very holy to each and every one of us. So before I give it to Naftali, just to send a big hug, Shana Tova, Chag Sukkot Sameach, happy holiday to each and every one of you. To send regards to our Welshman parents, Jill and Ed, and of course to dear Mike, and to each and every one of you through them.
Thank you for your words, Matan. Matan spoke beautifully about the concept of that ray of light that you guys are for us over here in Israel, and that light we are all searching for after difficult COVID years and difficult times. And we're all experiencing a real tough 2 years of darkness, of separation from ourselves, separation from our families, from our communities, congregations, people being in isolation, millions of people dying around the world. In Israel itself, we experienced a very, very difficult COVID plague, where I was doctor in the hospital with 47 patients. There were nights that 5 or 6 patients died every shift. And those were really difficult times, very, very dark times. That you need that hope, you need that ray of light, you need that little candle to light up the situation, to give you some hope, to bring you closer to understanding what God has in planning and how God doesn't leave us even in those difficult times. And I think that this is the concept of these high holidays. We call these holidays Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Chag Sukkot, or 3 holidays that are one after each other. And the concept is that the meaning, the true meaning of returning to ourselves, returning to God, returning to the true essence of life, having repentance. And on Rosh Hashanah, in a few days, we're going to be davening and seeing how God is God of the universe, and how he created this incredible world for us. And out of that understanding how God is so incredible, we could go on to Yom Kippur and deal with our sins and deal with our imperfections and say sorry and purify ourselves from within. And from that, we could continue on to Chag Sukkot. Chag Sukkot is to really have Hakarat HaTov, to see the good in this world, to see the light in this world, to see how much blessings God has bring upon us. Chag Sukkot in Israel, in these hills, if we would go 2,000 years back, we would see Olei Regalim. We would see people from all around Israel coming up with the cows and horses and donkeys, all decorated with fruits and vegetables of the land, of the Holy Land of Israel, dancing and singing, walking up to the Temple Mount of Bet HaMikdash in Jerusalem, and celebrating all God's blessings He has brought upon earth. And I think that this year, especially this year, there are many, many lights and many, many times of hope where we could see how the vaccines have this incredible effect in Israel. And even though the Delta is here, the third booster is really proving itself in lowering the rates of severity of illness and lowering the rates of mortality. And there are great data that's coming out from Israel that has over almost 2 million people who were vaccinated with the third booster, and the mortality is down and the severity of disease is down. We closed our COVID ward, and I think that this sends a message of hope to the whole world from Israel that God has never left us and God will always be with us. And from that, we really want to bless you, our friends out in the UK, in Wales, Father's house. Chag Sameach, Shana Tova. Have a wonderful year.
Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.
ישועת ישועתם
I don't know about you, but I was really excited watching Matan and Naftali running in Israel, and to see Tom and all his colleagues on the mountains in the Falklands. Thank you for joining Tom and being with him as he made this declaration of his support for Israel and your support for Israel all the way from the Falklands Islands. So thank you to Tom and all your colleagues there, Tom. But also thank you to Steven Jaffe. And I feel really privileged to know you guys and to be part of this presentation in support of Israel with you, because my Jewish friends and the friends that I have in Israel and the people who support Israel are people who support, as I said earlier, democracy, the exporting of equality, social justice, and all these things. So I feel very, very privileged indeed, as I know all of us at Father's House do, to know you guys and to be part of your lives as you're part of our lives. So thank you so much. I want to also say to everybody watching, enjoy the Feast of Tabernacles and have a really great time. We're having a meal this time, and we're celebrating at Father's House, as we always have done, the feast, which is the feast which speaks about God tabernacling with man. And this feast also is the feast at which Yeshua was born. So fulfilling the feast itself, as he has done with all the feasts and the appointed times that God has given to us through the scriptures. So please enjoy the Feast of Tabernacles this year. And next year, we'll hope we will be able to again support Israel in this way and promote the things that Israel are doing. And if you want to help and support in that, and give a donation which will go to Israel, which will go to charities in Israel and good works in Israel, then please get in touch with us at Father's House, and you can go through our website, which is www.fathershouse.wales, and you can make a donation. Or if you want to know more about the feast and want to be part of what we're doing, then please get in touch with us then, and we're very happy to talk to you and to try and involve you in the things that we do in support of Israel. So have a really nice Tabernacles holiday, and enjoy the rest of the Feast of Tabernacles as we come towards the 8th day and our celebrations of the 8th day of Tabernacles. So I want to say line it off, and a good night and happy Tabernacles.
shine upon you. The Lord bless you. Listen. The Lord keep you. The Lord be gracious. Let